you read Leviticus chapter 16, verse 5, the scriptures make it clear that both goats made one single unified offering. The dead goat symbolized vicarious death. It's dying on behalf of something or someone, in this case, the entire nation. And the living goat that was sent away symbolized expiation, or the removal of sin and guilt. Both goats were necessary for the single sin offering. Both were aspects of the single sin offering. Are Adventists really trying to argue that Satan is a part of this single, unified sin offering to God?
First of all, both goats may have started as a single unified sin offering, Elsie, but they did not end as a single unified sin offering. Your friend Miles says context is king. I'm assuming you believe context is important. The context of Leviticus chapter 16 is very clear. And even though both of them did start as a single unified sin offering, they didn't end up that way. And that's the reason for the casting of lots. Go to Leviticus chapter 16, beginning in verse 7. I'm going to read from verse 7 to 10. Notice what it says. And he shall take the two goats and present them before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle meeting. Then Aaron shall cast lots for the two goats. Now, the word lot, when I looked it up in my blue letter Bible, take a look at it in the Hebrew text. It can also bear the word, it could also symbolize your destiny.
Devils.
Yeah, that's the literal meaning, though. The literal meaning. But the Strong's tells
Destiny.
us
Here it is.
that it can also represent the destiny. So when you have this one unified sin offering, right? But there's two of them, though. The point of the casting of the lots is to determine the destiny of those two. Otherwise, what's the point of casting lots? Now, I want you to notice something very interesting that takes place. Look at verse 9 very carefully now. All right? I want Elsie and every other critic to really watch this. And Aaron shall bring the goat on which the Lord's lot fell to offer it as the what?
As a sin offering.
Which one of the two becomes the sin offering after the lots are cast?
The one that was the Lord's goat.
One of them becomes the sin offering. So by the time you reach verse 9, they're both no longer the sin offering. One of them is the sin offering.
Start basing your arguments off of entire sections of scripture where you capture entire thoughts and what's going on contextually. Not this hopscotch exegesis all over the Bible in small little sound bites with preconceived beliefs and proof texts.
The point of the casting of the lots is to determine the destiny of those two. Otherwise, what's the point of casting lots? Now, I want you to notice something very interesting that takes place. Look at verse 9 very carefully now. All right? I want Elsie and every other critic to really watch this. And Aaron shall bring the goat on which the Lord's lot fell to offer it as the what?
As a sin offering.
Which one of the two becomes the sin offering after the lots are cast?
The one that was the Lord's goat.
One of them becomes the sin offering. So by the time you reach verse 9, they're both no longer the sin offering. One of them is the sin offering. Now, what about the other one? Look at verse 10. But the goat on which the lot fell, notice these two key words. To be. You see what happened there? To be the scapegoat. So verse 9 tells us one of them is the sin offering. It's no longer both, as we read in verse 5. Because if you read the context, verse 9 changes the whole thing and assigns two destinies to each one. One of them, the destiny is assigned to be the sin offering. The other one, the destiny is assigned to be the scapegoat. Our critic may have missed these very simple but very important words. It is the sin offering regarding the Lord's goat, and the scapegoat to be the scapegoat. So we have the sin offering, and then we have the scapegoat. Scapegoat is no longer the sin offering at this moment anymore by the time you reach verse 10. It's very clear. And in this biblical example, what we're having here is an example that shows a parallel between what took place in Leviticus 16, what took place here, and by the way, what has taken place in multiple other instances in the Bible. But this one's really good, though, because this one has two individuals. Just like in the type in Leviticus 16, there's two goats. They both started off the same way, but one of them ended up with that position. So if you read very carefully in Leviticus 16, verse 9, one of them, even though they both started as a single unified sin offering, they didn't end that way. One became the sin offering, the other one became the scapegoat.
You know, also, if we consider how sin offerings were dealt with in the Bible, right? Look at how it's consistent in the Bible. What happens to a sin offering? Exodus chapter 29, verse 14. I'm going to use King James Version because why not? But the flesh of the bullock and his skin and his dung shall thou burn with fire without the camp. It is a sin offering. So we see a sin offering in this case was destroyed. Exodus chapter 30, verse 10. It says, and Aaron shall make an atonement upon the horns of it once a year with the blood of the sin offering of atonements. Once in a year shall he make atonement upon it throughout your generations. It is most holy unto the Lord. So again, we see here what's happening with the sin offering. The blood was shed. Let's look at another example. And this is pretty consistent. Leviticus chapter 4, verses 3 and 4. It says this, if the priest that is anointed do sin according to the sin of the people, then let him bring for his sin which he have sinned a young bullock without blemish unto the Lord for a sin offering. And he shall bring the bullock unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord, and shall lay his hand upon the bullock's head and kill the bullock. There's a verse in the New Testament that says, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. At the heart of sin offerings is death.
Hebrews 9:22.
Leviticus chapter 4. Yep. Leviticus chapter 4, verse 24 says this, and he shall lay his hands upon the head of the goat and kill it in the place where they kill the burnt offerings before the Lord. It is a sin offering. Are you seeing a pattern here? When something is a sin offering, they die. Verse 29. Maybe it wasn't clear. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of the sin offering and slay the sin offering in the place of the burnt offering.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
Leviticus chapter 5. It wasn't clear yet? Okay, I'll give you another one. Leviticus 5, verse 5. It says, and it shall be when he shall be guilty in one of these things that he shall confess that he have sinned that thing, and he shall bring his trespass offering unto the Lord for his sin which he have sinned, a female from the flock, a lamb from the kid of the goats, for a sin offering, and the priest shall make an atonement for him concerning his sin. And if he be not able to bring a lamb, then he shall bring for his trespass which he hath committed 2 turtle doves, 2 young pigeons unto the Lord for one sin offering, one for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering. And he shall bring them unto a priest, who shall offer that which is for the sin offering first, and wring off his head from his neck, but shall not divide it asunder. Again, this is very consistent that sin offerings were killed. So I'm just adding that to what you were saying, Edwin, that when Leviticus chapter 16 says it's going to be for a sin offering, that first one was the sin offering. That first one fits the pattern of what happens with sin offerings that are all slain. Jesus was the sin offering. He was slain.
Right. And good point. Now, let's talk about expiation for a moment, right? Because, Elsie talks about this. A couple of other critics talk about that as well. Basically, the argument is that you have to have the scapegoat to get rid of sin, aka expiation, right? To get rid of sin out of the camp. And so therefore, it must represent Christ as well. This is the argument. But to reply to that, let's go to Bible. Because, Elsie says that with no biblical basis. He just sort of assumes that, well, it must be Christ because, well, the sin's got to be taken away. Where's the Bible for that? There isn't any. But I'm going to give Bible that shows something else. Go to Hebrews chapter 9. I want you to see something very important. And I'm gonna come back to Hebrews chapter 9 later to dive into this a bit more. But notice what it says in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 26. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 26 tells us something very important. How is expiation taking place? Now, keep in mind that the book of Hebrews breaks down and explains a lot of the ancient sanctuary service. So I'm going to take how Hebrews explains expiation versus how Elsie and others explain expiation. Verse 26 says, "For then must he often have suffered since the foundation of the world. But now once in the end of the world hath he appeared to do what? To put away sin." Now,
Oh my.
that's another way of saying expiation, because expiation to
Amazing.
them means to take away sin, right? To get
Come
it
on,
away.
preacher. Come on.
But it
Come
says
on.
to put away sin. How is he putting away sin? By sending Christ to a wilderness? No. What does the rest of the verse say?
Put away sacrifice.
By sacrifice.
By the
Sacrifice of himself.
of
Come on.
himself.
Come on.
Okay. So expiation is done by the Lord's goat, because the Lord's goat was sacrificed. Go there, and I'm gonna open it up in my Bible real quick. So Hebrews chapter 9, right? I want you to notice that. I'm gonna read it from my Bible. It says, verse 26. "He then would have suffered alone often since the foundation of the world. But now once in the end of the world, he has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself." Go to chapter 10, verse 11. Notice what it says. "And every priest stands ministering daily, offering repeatedly the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins." But notice what it says in the previous verse, though, verse 10. It says that he might, by the will we have been sanctified through the, how are we sanctified? Through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all. How was he offered? We just read it in the previous chapter. By being sacrificed. That, brothers and sisters, is what takes away the sins of the world. That is what takes away the sins of the people. It took sacrifice. Expiation is done by the sacrifice. So, that prompts the question then, what about the scapegoat? What service does that represent? We're going to get into that a little bit more. We kind of already mentioned it, right? But that's how expiation is done, by sacrifice.
I wanted to add another little point into that. By the way, that was powerful. That was good stuff, Edwin. So we got that very clear, that it was the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, his body being slain, that put away sin. There's also something else. God is a God of order, right? Check this out. When we consider all the appointed times, some people call them feast days, when we consider all of these, Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Pentecost, trumpets, Day of Atonement, tabernacles, we can clearly see that there was an order when God first made them. Jesus also followed this order. We understand that Passover, this all happened at his first coming, right? Passover was his death. Unleavened bread was his burial. First fruits, that was when he rose. He has become the first fruits of those that raised from the dead. That's what the Bible says. And then we see that happened in order. Then we see Pentecost, 50 days later. He was in heaven at this time. And the Bible tells us in Revelation chapter 21, verse 3, that we are going to tabernacle with God when the new heavens and new earth happens. So now, what about trumpets and Day of Atonement?
Because we can recognize that the antitypical Day of Atonement was the actual day of the crucifixion, not some huge gap from the sacrifice taking place and then a decades-long process beginning in 1813 years later. Just like on the typical Day of Atonement in Leviticus, the antitypical Day of Atonement was also a single day where Jesus functioned as the high priest, offering up himself as the ultimate fulfillment of all of the law's sacrifices and offerings, with the penalty for sin paid, the sin removed, and Jesus declaring it is finished. End of story.
For some reason, when you say at the cross, Jesus both died and took away sin, so therefore he's both goats. How does that make sense if Jesus is going in order in all of these events? Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, he went in order. Pentecost came next. We understand Tabernacles is coming at the end of time. Shouldn't we expect the Day of Atonement to come just before the Tabernacles? Shouldn't we expect that? As a matter of fact, you may have missed this earlier, but this is what Oregon said, one of the people that your friend likes to quote. The Day of Atonement remains for us until the sun sets. That is, until the world comes to an end. For let us stand before the gates waiting for our high priest who remains within the Holy of Holies. Who remains within the Holy of Holies? The high priest? He sounds like an Adventist. But this is Oregon, a church father, whom you love to quote. The Holy of Holies, that is before the Father, and who intercedes not for the sins of everyone, but for the sins of those who wait for him. For he does not intercede for those who come into the lot of the he-goat, which is sent into the wilderness. He intercedes only for those who are the lot of the Lord, who wait for him before the gates, who do not depart from the temple, who are not absent from fasting and prayer. Oregon believed that the true Day of Atonement was going to happen before the second coming, right at the end of time. So when you really consider what was going on the Day of Atonement, we can clearly see we have to look at something like how this fits. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to fast forward to it right now. When we look at just Leviticus chapter 16, a summary of the Day of Atonement, this is what happened in order. You could read the verses, read all of Leviticus chapter 16. You'll see this. The high priest does the main work on the Day of Atonement. Jesus is our high priest. The Bible is very clear about that. His main work is the Day of Atonement work. He became our high priest when he went to heaven. Anyway, we should expect that he's doing a Day of Atonement work in heaven. He brings two goats. One was to be the sin offering, and the other was to be the scapegoat. The first goat was killed, and the blood was sprinkled for an atonement. The atonement was done. And that's actually what the verse says. The scapegoat was not killed, but has all the sins confessed on his head and sent into the wilderness. What is the next thing that happens when this scapegoat is sent into the wilderness? In the wilderness, everything related to sin was burnt. This is just Leviticus chapter 16. This is the order of Leviticus chapter 16. After the atonement was done with the first goat and everything was done in the most holy place, the high priest comes to the scapegoat and confesses all the sins on his head. Let's talk about this real quick. Jesus died. He's the first goat. The high priest takes the blood into the most holy place. This is what happens on the Day of Atonement. Jesus went into the most holy place with his own blood. Jesus comes out. The high priest comes out of the most holy place, grabs the scapegoat. Are you telling me Jesus is going to come out of the most holy place and grab himself? Because he's a scapegoat? He's going to grab himself? No, sorry. No, it says he grabs himself. Jesus is going to grab himself and put all the sins on his head again and send. No, it says he was sent to the wilderness by the hand of a fit man. Jesus is going to have somebody grab him and put him in the wilderness where everything is burnt up.
Can I comment on that?
And then the Day of Atonement ends with the Feast of Tabernacles coming next. It doesn't make sense. If you go to Revelation chapter 14, it's Logical. It's simple. The goat, the devil, which the Bible says goat means devil. Leviticus chapter 17, verse 7. The devil has all the sins that he is responsible for. All the sins that he has caused. As the originator of sin, has everything placed on his head, and he's sent in the wilderness where everything is burnt up. And then the Feast of Tabernacles comes. This is the order of Leviticus chapter 16. It's the exact same order in Revelation chapter 21, chapter 20, and chapter 21. It's the exact same order. Unless you're saying Jesus put sins back on his head after leaving the most holy place.
Right.
Come on.
And
I'm just a systematic thinker. You know, I want to know, am I thinking things that contradict one another? Am I believing things that if I believe this over here, does that cause me problems over here?
if the Day of Atonement has to finds its ultimate fulfillment in the last days, then our only question is, where in the Bible can we find that ritual finding that fulfillment? And here we find it in Revelation chapter 20. This is a very clear text, Revelation chapter 20, which directly points to Lucifer, the devil, as the one who would be forced by someone stronger than him into a desolate area, just like the scapegoat in Leviticus chapter 16.
The view that the Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and Tabernacles are yet future is not a uniquely Adventist thing. How many of you are familiar with the web page Got Questions? Many Bible scholars and commentators believe that these fall feasts have not yet been fulfilled by Jesus. However, the blessed hope for all believers in Jesus Christ is that they most assuredly will be fulfilled. As the 4 spring feasts were fulfilled literally and right on the actual feast day in connection with Christ's coming, these 3 fall feasts, it is believed by many, will likewise be fulfilled literally in connection to the Lord's second coming. Many Bible scholars and commentators believe that these fall feasts have not yet been fulfilled by Jesus. But the point is, they are saying these were not fulfilled at the cross. Why aren't they like, oh, all the feasts were fulfilled when Jesus died? Because that's not a biblical position. It doesn't even matter who these people are. They are not Adventists. You go online and you can find them. They are regular Christians, as the critics would say. So the next logical question for us, beloved, is this. Was the Day of Atonement fulfilled at the Passover? Either yes or no. Now, it wasn't yes for unleavened bread. It wasn't yes for first fruits. It wasn't yes for Pentecost. It wasn't yes. It's not yes for the Feast of Trumpets. Is it yes for the Day of Atonement? Is that feast suddenly just, oh, this is just all the stuff that happened when Jesus died at the cross? Why the need for the Day of Atonement if the Passover and unleavened bread already signify the death of Jesus and the putting away of sin? Is God just like, oh yeah, in case y'all forgot about Passover, let me just make this Day of Atonement? But then we go to the next feast, the Feast of Tabernacles, and everybody universally believes that the Feast of Tabernacles represents when the tabernacle of God is with man forever. So chronology, skip that one. Let's make that one the cross, and then the last one chronological. The only way I could see someone hanging tenaciously to that is if they had something that they wanted to disprove. Because otherwise, it makes no sense. If you're not thinking about Adventists, you would have no problem with what these other guys said about, oh, the first 4 feasts were fulfilled here, and the last 3 will be fulfilled sometime around Jesus' second coming. You would have no problem, except you're like, oh, wait a minute, the Adventists believe that too, so no, it is wrong.
Because we can recognize that the antitypical Day of Atonement was the actual day of the crucifixion, not some huge gap from the sacrifice taking place and then a decades-long process beginning in 1813 years later. I'm just a systematic thinker. I want to know, am I thinking things that contradict one another? Am I believing things that if I believe this over here, does that cause me problems over here?
Truth is logical. Error is, yeah, this is not the cross. Yeah, this is not the cross. Yeah, that's not the cross. Yeah, but that's the cross. We're going to go back. That's the cross. And then the one after that, yeah, that's not the cross. Truth is logical. Error is confusion. Error is Babylon. Babylon all day. So we could either do Bible all day or Babylon all day. Which will it be? You cannot hate a group of people so much that you throw logic out the window and just make it that whatever they say, they got to be lying, because it just can't be true. There's just no way it can be true.